They pounded on his door like they were seconds from dying, and they were. When Tomas Valdez opened it, a widow collapsed into his arms with 2 freezing boys and a baby barely breathing, and the name she whispered next belonged to one of his own men. That was the moment the most feared Mafia boss in Blackridge had to choose protect his empire or burn it down from the inside. If this story pulled you in, go ahead and subscribe so you never miss what's ahead. I've got another unforgettable story coming tomorrow. And while you're here, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing people tuned in from all over the world. Okay, let's get back into it. Snow swallowed the mountain town of Blackridge like a frozen fist, muffling the world into silence. Tomas Valdez woke before the sound reached him, his instincts, sharpened by decades of survival in a world where hesitation meant death, pulling him from the edge of sleep. For a moment he remained still on the leather sofa, near the dying fire, listening to the wind tearing at the reinforced windows of his timber lodge. Then it came again, a pounding, frantic, uneven, nearly swallowed by the roar of the blizzard. His lieutenant, Miguel, appeared first in the doorway of the great room. The stocky man with graying temples had served Tomas for 15 years, carried 2 bullet scars from protecting him, and knew without words when something was wrong. Miguel's hand rested instinctively near the weapon at his hip, his weathered face tense, eyes cutting toward the massive front door. The pounding came again, desperate now, weakening. Miguel had pulled Tomas from more than one ambush. He'd stood beside him when rival factions tried to burn them out of a warehouse in El Paso. He carried his own darkness quietly. A daughter he wasn't allowed to see, a marriage destroyed by the life he'd chosen, nightmares that made him walk the perimeter at 3 rather than sleep. Now Miguel looked at Tomas with a question in his eyes that didn't need speaking. Should I check it? Could be a trap. Tomas rose from the sofa, his tall frame unfolding with controlled precision. He wore black even-here dress pants, an open-collar shirt revealing the edge of ink that crawled up his neck and disappeared beneath the fabric. Tattoos that told stories and symbols: loyalty, loss, violence, survival. His dark hair was slightly disheveled from sleep, but his expression remained unreadable as he crossed the hardwood floor, boots silent despite his size. Miguel moved to flank him, hand hovering near his weapon. Tomas reached the door, paused, then pulled it open. The wind howled in first, carrying needles of ice and the smell of pine and frozen earth. Then he saw her. A young woman stood swaying in the snow, her thin olive coat crusted white, her long dark hair tangled with ice and clinging to her pale, exhausted face. She clutched a bundle wrapped in gray blankets against her chest, an infant, barely visible except for one small hand. 2 boys, perhaps 7 and 9 years old, pressed themselves against her sides, their jackets inadequate for the storm. The younger boy wore a brown knit cap pulled low over frightened eyes. The older boy's face was red and raw from the cold, his blue jacket snow-covered, his expression beyond exhaustion into something closer to shock. She opened her mouth. No sound came at first, her lips cracked and blue. Then, barely a whisper through chattering teeth, "Please, my babies." Her knees buckled. Tomas moved without thinking. He caught her before she hit the ground, one arm steadying her thin frame while Miguel stepped forward to grab the older boy who'd started to collapse. The infant made a weak sound against the woman's chest, not a cry, just a thread-like whimper that cut through the howling wind. For 3 seconds, Tomas Valdez stood in that doorway holding a stranger, surrounded by children freezing to death, while his mind calculated threats, angles, possibilities. Every instinct he'd honed told him this could be a setup. Rival families had tried softer approaches before: women, children, sympathy plays designed to breach his defenses. But the ice crusted on her eyelashes was real. The blue tint to the younger boy's lips was real. The infant's labored breathing was real. Then he made a choice that would shatter everything he'd built his empire on. He stepped back and pulled them all inside. "Miguel, lock it down. Full perimeter check. No one approaches without clearance." Miguel nodded once, steadying the older boy before moving toward the security panel near the entrance. 2 other guards emerged from the shadows of the lodgemen who'd been stationed in the west wing, their faces alert, weapons visible. Tomas guided the woman toward the massive stone fireplace that dominated the great room. Golden light spilled from its flames, warming the space filled with heavy timber furniture and Navajo rugs. The contrast between the frozen nightmare outside and this haven was stark wealth and safety, separated from death by inches of wood and glass. "Sit," Tomas said quietly, lowering her onto the leather sofa he'd just vacated. She collapsed into it, still clutching the infant with both arms, as if someone might tear the baby away. The two boys pressed against her sides immediately, the younger one burying his face in her shoulder, the older one staring at Tomas with wide, wary eyes. Tomas stepped back, his expression carefully neutral. Up close, he could see the woman's hands were red and swollen from frostbite. Her coat, though clean, was worn thin at the elbows. There were shadows under her eyes that spoke of weeks without proper sleep. And there, just visible at the cuff of her sleeve bruises, dark purple fingerprints circling her wrist. Something cold settled in Tomas's chest. Not sympathy. Recognition. He knew what those marks meant. He'd seen them before on women caught in the machinery of violence, on people who'd run from something worse than winter. "Miguel," he called without turning. "Dry clothes, children's sizes, and food. Something warm. Boss. Now." Miguel disappeared down the hallway. The woman hadn't looked up. She rocked slightly, a reflexive motion meant to soothe the infant, her breath coming in shaky gasps as warmth began creeping into her frozen body. The younger boy whimpered softly. The older boy's teeth chattered so violently he couldn't have spoken if he'd tried. Tomas remained standing, hands loose at his sides, watching. He didn't speak, didn't offer false comfort. He simply waited, a skill he'd mastered long ago, while the fire crackled and the storm raged beyond the walls. Finally, the woman raised her head. Her eyes met his brown, red-rimmed, filled with desperate gratitude and lingering terror. She opened her mouth, seemed to struggle for words, then managed, "Thank you. I didn't know where else." She broke off, tears spilling down her cheeks. Tomas studied her face. There was something there beneath the exhaustion and fear. Strength, maybe, or stubbornness. The kind of determination it took to walk miles through a blizzard with 3 children rather than surrender. "Who are you running from?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them. The woman's expression shifted, fear sharpening into something closer to panic. Her arms tightened around the infant. The older boy's eyes went wide. She swallowed hard. I can't." "Who?" Tomas repeated, his voice soft but unyielding. "Did this?" He gestured slightly toward her bruised wrist. She followed his gaze, pulled her sleeve down quickly, then closed her eyes. When she opened them again, tears streamed freely, and she whispered a name that changed everything. The name hung in the air like smoke. Javier Ruiz. Tomas's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, a calculation, cold and precise. Miguel, returning with an armful of clothing, froze mid-step in the doorway. The two men exchanged a glance that lasted less than a second but communicated everything. Javier Ruiz was one of Tomas's lieutenants, a rising operator who managed logistics across 3 counties. Ambitious, efficient, trusted, or so Tomas had believed. These. Miguel set the clothes on the arm of the sofa, sweatpants, thermal shirts, thick socks. His voice was carefully neutral. "Food's coming." The woman, she still hadn't given her name, stared at the dry clothes as if they might disappear. Her hands trembled as she reached for them, then stopped, looking up at Tomas with sudden fear. You know him." It wasn't a question. Tomas said nothing. His silence was answer enough. Fresh panic flooded her features. She started to stand, clutching the infant tighter, her body moving on pure instinct. Run, hide, survive. "I shouldn't. We need to go. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Sit down." The command was quiet but absolute. She froze, caught between terror and exhaustion. The older boy grabbed her coat with both hands. The younger one whimpered. Tomas's voice softened fractionally. "You walked through a blizzard. Your children are hypothermic. You're not going anywhere tonight. But if he finds out we're here, he won't touch you." The certainty in those 4 words seemed to reach her through the panic. She searched his face, looking for lies, for threats, for whatever trap she'd stumbled into. But Tomas's expression revealed nothing except cold fact. Slowly, she sank back onto the sofa. "Get them warm," Tomas said, gesturing to the clothes. "We'll talk after." He turned and walked toward the far end of the great room, where floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto the storm. Miguel followed, positioning himself so he could watch both the woman and the hallway. "Javier," Miguel said quietly. "I know, if she's telling the truth." "She is." Tomas's jaw tightened. "Look at her wrist. Look at those children. That's not theater." Miguel was silent for a moment, his weathered face troubled. "What do you want to do? Find out what Javier's been doing that I don't know about?" Behind them, The woman was helping the boys change into dry clothes with shaking hands. The younger boy, still wearing his brown knit cap, even indoors, pulled on thermal pants that pooled around his feet. The older boy stripped off his wet blue jacket with visible relief, his small body shuddering as warmth began reaching his core. The woman kept the infant wrapped against her chest, only adjusting the blankets to check the baby's breathing. A girl. Tomas noticed now pale wisps of hair visible against the gray fabric. Another guard appeared with a tray soup, bread, hot tea. The woman stared at the food with hollow-eyed hunger but didn't move. Instead, she poured soup into bowls and handed them to her sons first. The older boy took his with both hands, drinking directly from the bowl. The younger boy ate more slowly, his eyes darting between the food and Tomas like a stray animal expecting the meal to be snatched away. The woman watched them eat with fierce attention, as if counting each swallow. Only when both boys had finished, only when they'd soaked bread in the remaining broth and scraped the bowls clean, did she reach for her own portion. Tomas noticed, filed it away. Miguel noticed too. His expression softened fractionally, a rare thing for a man who'd spent 15 years enforcing Tomas's will with violence when necessary. The woman ate mechanically, without tasting, her focus still on the children. The infant stirred against her chest, making small sounds. She shifted her hold, supporting the baby's head with practiced gentleness even as her own hands shook from cold and adrenaline crash. When the soup was gone, she set the bowl down and finally spoke again. "My name is Lauren." Her voice was steadier now, though exhaustion weighted every word. "Lauren Bennett. These are my sons, Noah and Caleb. And this." She looked down at the infant. "This is Emma." Tomas turned from the window. "How do you know Javier Ruiz?" Lauren's face went pale. She pulled her sons closer, and both boys pressed against her sides like they'd done it 1,000 times, a practiced formation born from repeated danger. "I don't. Not directly." She swallowed hard. "My husband did. Daniel. He ran a small logistics company. Shipping and transport. About 6 months ago, he started noticing irregularities. Manifests that didn't match cargo. Deliveries to addresses that didn't exist. He thought maybe it was just clerical errors at first." Her hands tightened on the blanket around Emma. Then he opened one of the shipments. Found guns. Military-grade weapons hidden inside crates marked as construction equipment. Miguel's expression hardened. Tomas remained perfectly still. "Daniel wanted to report it," Lauren continued, her voice dropping. He thought he was doing the right thing. He told his contact, the man who'd hired his company for the routes, that he couldn't be part of it anymore. That he was going to authorities. She closed her eyes. 2 weeks later, Daniel was dead. They called it an accident, a truck collision on Route 34, but the brakes on his vehicle had been cut. I found the mechanic's report they tried to bury. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her voice didn't break. Then the debt collectors came. Men in expensive suits saying Daniel owed money, $50,000, then 100. The amounts kept changing. They came to our apartment, broke windows, threatened the boys. Her voice finally cracked. One night they set fire to our building. We barely got out. Caleb, the older boy, was crying silently now, his face buried in his mother's shoulder. Noah stared straight ahead, his young face carefully blank, too blank for a child his age. "I took what I could carry and ran," Lauren whispered. "We've been moving for 3 weeks. Shelters, churches, anywhere that would take us. But tonight the last shelter said they were full, and the storm came. And I saw your light through the trees." She looked up at Tomas, her eyes red-rimmed but direct. "I swear I didn't know this was your house. Didn't know you were connected. My babies were dying. I had to try." Tomas studied her in silence. Behind him, snow battered the windows with relentless fury. The fire crackled. Emma made soft sounds against her mother's chest. Finally he spoke. "Javier Ruiz works for me." Lauren's face went white. "Which means," Tomas continued, his voice cold and precise, "someone in my organization has been running weapons without authorization. Someone ordered your husband killed. And someone is hunting you to tie up loose ends." He stepped closer, and Lauren instinctively pulled her children tighter. But Tomas's next words weren't a threat. "You're safe here tonight. Tomorrow, we find out who gave Javier his orders." Lauren didn't sleep. Tomas had offered her one of the guest rooms, a space larger than her entire apartment had been, with a bed covered in thick blankets and windows overlooking the snow-buried forest. The boys had collapsed almost immediately, curled together under the covers with Emma nestled between them in a makeshift nest of pillows. But Lauren sat in the leather chair by the window, watching her children breathe, unable to close her eyes. Every creak of the lodge made her flinch. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. The warmth that had felt like salvation hours ago now felt like a trap slowly closing. She'd walked into the home of a man connected to the people hunting her, a man whose lieutenant had murdered her husband. What have I done? Through the partially open door, she could hear low voices from somewhere deeper in the lodge, Tomas and his men, discussing something she couldn't make out, discussing her probably, deciding what to do with the liability that had stumbled onto their doorstep. Emma stirred, making soft sounds. Lauren moved to the bed immediately, checking her daughter's breathing, her temperature, the color of her tiny lips, still pale, but warmer, alive. Keep them alive, that's all that matters. A knock at the door made her jump. "It's Miguel," a gruff voice said quietly. "Boss wants to see you. I'll stay with the kids." Lauren's heart hammered. She looked at her sleeping sons, at Emma's small form barely visible between them. Every instinct screamed not to leave them, but refusing felt more dangerous than complying. She opened the door. Miguel stood in the hallway, his weathered face unreadable. But his eyes flicked past her to the children, and something in his expression softened fractionally. "They'll be safe," he said quietly. "You have my word." It was the word of a man who worked for criminals. But it was also the word of a father who understood what those 3 small lives meant. Lauren nodded and followed him down the hallway. The lodge was built like a fortress disguised as luxury. Heavy timber beams crossed the cathedral ceiling of the main room. Stone fireplace, leather furniture. But Lauren noticed the details now reinforced door frames, security cameras tucked into corners, windows that were likely bulletproof. The artwork on the walls was expensive, but the men stationed at intervals throughout the space wore weapons openly. Tomas stood in what looked like an office off the great room, his back to her, studying papers spread across a heavy wooden desk. He'd changed into fresh clothes, black dress pants, a charcoal shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing the intricate tattoos that covered his forearms, symbols and script in what looked like Spanish, woven with images she couldn't quite make out in the low light. He didn't turn when she entered. "Close the door," he said quietly. Lauren did, her pulse racing. Tomas finally turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, but there was something dangerous in the controlled stillness of his posture, not directed at her, but at something the papers had revealed. "Your husband," Tomas said. "Daniel Bennett. He worked for Summit Logistics?" Lauren nodded, surprised. "How did you—" "I know every shipping company that moves goods through this region." His voice was cold, factual. Summit handled legitimate contracts for construction suppliers. Small operation, good reputation. Until 6 months ago, Lauren whispered. "Until 6 months ago," Tomas agreed. He gestured to the papers. "I've been going through my organization's logistics records. Cross-referencing routes, manifests, payments." He paused. "Javier Ruiz expanded operations 8 months ago. New territory, new revenue streams. I authorized it." The weight in those last 3 words made Lauren's chest tighten. "He told me he'd secured contracts with manufacturers looking to avoid interstate regulations. Gray market, but not illegal." I didn't dig deeper. Tomas's jaw tightened. That was a mistake. He picked up one of the documents, studying it with cold focus. "Javier's been running weapons for 3 months before your husband discovered it. High-grade firearms, military surplus. The kind of merchandise that brings federal attention if you're careless." His eyes lifted to Lauren. "Your husband threatening to report it would have destroyed the entire operation. Maybe brought down parts of my legitimate business too." Lauren's hands clenched. "So killing him was just, what? Protecting profits? Without my authorization." The words were sharp, precise. "I don't order executions over shipping routes, and I sure as hell don't hunt widows and children." He set the paper down with controlled force. "Javier acted alone, or he's working with someone else. Either way, he violated the one rule I enforce absolutely. You don't bring heat down on this organization with reckless violence." Lauren stared at him, trying to reconcile the man who'd pulled her freezing children inside with the criminal boss calmly discussing murder and federal charges. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. Tomas was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to step back. But she held her ground, lifting her chin despite the fear coursing through her. Finally, he spoke. I'm going to find out who else is involved. How deep this goes. Whether Javier was stupid, or if someone's been building a separate operation under my nose. And then I clean my house. The casual certainty in his voice sent a chill down her spine. This was a man who'd built an empire through calculated violence, who ruled through fear and precision, and she'd just handed him proof that someone in his organization had betrayed him. What about us? Lauren's voice barely rose above a whisper. My children. What happens to us when you're done cleaning? Tomas studied her for a long moment. Snow continued battering the windows behind him, the storm showing no signs of breaking. That depends, he said finally. On what? On whether you're willing to help me burn down the people who killed your husband. Lauren's breath caught. She'd expected threats, expected to be used as leverage or silenced as a witness. She hadn't expected this. I don't understand, she managed. Tomas moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. But he didn't touch her, didn't crowd her, just held her gaze with absolute focus. Daniel opened a shipment, saw weapons. That means there are records, shipping manifests, photographs, maybe documentation he kept as insurance. Do you have any of his files? Anything he might have hidden before he died? Lauren's mind raced. After Daniel's death, she'd grabbed what she could from their apartment before running. Most of it had been abandoned at various shelters when they'd had to move quickly, but there was one thing. A hard drive, she whispered. He kept backups on an external drive. I have it, in my bag. Something flickered in Tomas's expression. Not quite satisfaction. Something colder. Get it. Lauren didn't move. If I give you this, if I help you, what happens to my children? Tomas's voice dropped, quiet and absolute. They stay under my protection. No one touches them. No one touches you. And when this is over, Javier Ruiz and everyone involved in your husband's death answers for it. You're asking me to trust you. Lauren's voice shook. Trust a man who runs the same world that killed Daniel. No. Tomas's eyes held hers. I'm offering you a choice. Run again, keep hiding, wait for them to find you eventually. Or stand your ground and watch me destroy the people who took everything from you. The fire crackled in the distance. Outside, the blizzard raged with relentless fury. Lauren thought of Daniel's face the last morning she'd seen him alive. Thought of Noah's silent tears and Caleb's too careful blankness. Thought of Emma, who'd never know her father. She'd been running for 3 weeks. She was done running. The hard drive's in my coat pocket, she said quietly. I'll get it. Tomas nodded once, and as Lauren turned to leave, she heard him speak again. So quietly she almost missed it. They'll pay for what they did to your family. You have my word. It was a promise from a dangerous man. But it was the first promise in 3 weeks that felt like hope. The hard drive was smaller than Tomas expected, a slim black rectangle no larger than his palm. Lauren had retrieved it from the inner pocket of her worn coat, her hands trembling slightly as she placed it on his desk. Daniel backed up everything, she said quietly. Financial records, shipping manifests, photos. He was meticulous like that. Drove me crazy sometimes, how he'd document every detail. Her voice caught on the past tense. Tomas connected the drive to his laptop without comment. The screen flickered as files began loading hundreds of folders organized by date and client name. He opened the most recent directory. What he found made his jaw tighten. Shipping routes that didn't exist in his authorized operations. Manifests listing construction materials that concealed detailed inventories of firearms, AR, 1, 5, S, Glocks, even heavier ordnance. Photographs Daniel must have taken covertly. Wooden crates, stamped with legitimate company logos, their contents visible where lids had been pried open, and payments. Wire transfers from shell companies Tomas didn't recognize, routed through accounts in the Cayman Islands. Miguel, standing behind him, let out a low whistle. That's at least $2 million in hardware. 3 months of operations, Tomas said coldly. Javier built an entire distribution network without oversight. He couldn't have done this alone, Miguel added. Moving that volume, he'd need drivers, warehouse access, border contacts, and someone to wash the money. Tomas scrolled through financial records. These accounts aren't tied to our legitimate business. Someone set up a parallel operation. Lauren watched from the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. Does this help? It gives me names. Tomas's voice was flat. Locations. Evidence of... He stopped. Miguel had gone rigid, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. Through the window behind Tomas, barely visible through the swirling snow, headlights cut through the darkness. 2 vehicles, coming up the long private drive toward the lodge. "We're not expecting anyone," Miguel said quietly. Tomas was already moving. He grabbed the hard drive, disconnected it, and handed it to Lauren. "Take this to your children. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me or Miguel." "What's happening?" "Go, now." The command in his voice sent her running. Tomas crossed to a cabinet built into the wall, opening it to reveal a small arsenal. He pulled out a Glock, checked the magazine, chambered a round with practiced efficiency. Miguel was already armed, speaking rapidly into a radio. 2 unknowns approaching main entrance. Position Alpha and Bravo. Secure the perimeter. No one gets past the lodge. Outside, the vehicles stopped 50 yards from the house, close enough to be threatening, far enough to avoid immediate engagement. 4 men emerged, dark shapes against the white landscape. They wore heavy coats, but even from this distance, Tomas could see the bulk of weapons beneath. "They're not trying to hide it," Miguel observed. "They're not here to talk." Tomas watched the men fan out, moving with military precision. "They're here for Lauren. How did they find her?" "Doesn't matter. They're not getting her." One of the men pulled out a phone, the screen's glow visible in the darkness, making a call, reporting in. Tomas's radio crackled. "Boss, we've got 2 more vehicles on the access road, at least 6 additional contacts. They're boxing us in." Miguel swore quietly. 10 men, that's a kill team, or a message. Tomas's voice was ice cold. "Javier's telling me to hand her over." He moved toward the front door, ignoring Miguel's protest. "Boss, you can't. Stay with the woman and children. If anyone gets past me, you get them out the back. There's a snowmobile in the shed. Keys are in the ignition." "Tomas, that's an order." Tomas pulled open the heavy door and stepped into the blizzard. The cold hit him like a physical blow, snow immediately clinging to his hair and shoulders. He wore no coat, just the charcoal shirt and dress pants, his tattoos exposed to the freezing air. The men advancing on his lodge stopped when they saw him, a lone figure, standing in the golden light spilling from the doorway. "That's far enough," Tomas called, his voice cutting through the wind. The lead man, tall, military build, expensive tactical gear, kept walking. His 3 companions fanned out, weapons held ready but not yet raised. "Tomas Valdez," the man said, stopping 20 feet away. "We're here for the woman and her kids. Hand them over, and we leave peacefully." "Who sent you?" "Does it matter? You're a businessman. This is business. The woman's a loose end. You understand how this works." Tomas's expression didn't change. "I understand someone sent a kill team to my home, in a blizzard, without permission. That's either remarkable stupidity or remarkable disrespect." The man's jaw tightened. "We're not here for a conversation. Then you've made a mistake. There are 10 of us, 1 of you. Be smart about this." Tomas took a step forward, his hands loose at his sides, the Glock held casually but ready. Snow swirled between them, the storm howling like something alive. "You're on my land," Tomas said quietly, each word precise and cold. "Threatening people under my protection. I'm going to give you 1 chance to leave. Can't do that. Then you're going to die in the snow." The man's hand moved toward his weapon. Tomas was faster. The Glock came up in a fluid motion, years of training compressed into a heartbeat. He fired twice, center mass, professional, efficient. The lead man dropped. The clearing erupted. Muzzle flashes lit the snowfall like lightning. Tomas moved, diving behind the thick timber column supporting the porch roof as bullets tore into wood. He returned fire, dropping a second man who'd broken cover too soon. Miguel appeared in the doorway with 2 other guards, their weapons adding to the chaos. The attackers scattered, using the vehicles for cover, but they'd lost the element of surprise. In the distance, more gunfire, the perimeter guards engaging the men who'd tried to flank the lodge. One of the attackers made a desperate rush toward the door. Tomas stepped out from cover and put him down with 3 shots. The man fell 5 feet from the entrance, blood staining the fresh snow. The remaining men broke. They retreated to their vehicles, engines roaring to life, tires spinning in the snow as they fled back down the mountain road. Miguel's men pursued with measured fire, ensuring they kept running. Silence descended, broken only by the wind and the distant sound of engines fading. Tomas stood in the snow, weapon still raised, his shirt soaked through and clinging to his skin. Steam rose from his shoulders where body heat met freezing air. His hands' tattooed knuckles steady slowly lowered the Glock. 3 bodies lay in the snow. Dark shapes against white. Miguel emerged from the lodge, his expression grim. Perimeter reports 4 more down. The rest ran. We're clear. Tomas nodded, his breathing controlled despite the adrenaline. He looked at the bodies, then at his lodge, bullet holes scarring the timber, windows somehow still intact. Get rid of them, he said quietly, before the storm buries them. He turned to go inside, then stopped. Through the window of the guest room, he could see Lauren's silhouette. She stood pressed against the glass, one hand covering her mouth, her sons behind her. She'd watched everything. Their eyes met across the distance. She'd asked him what would happen if she stayed. Now she knew exactly what kind of protection she'd accepted, and what it would cost. Lauren couldn't stop shaking. She'd pulled the boys away from the window after the gunfire stopped, wrapped them in blankets, and held them while they trembled. Noah had cried silently, his small body rigid with fear. Caleb had stared at nothing, his face carefully blank again, that terrible absence of expression that broke her heart more than tears ever could. Emma slept through it all, mercifully oblivious. But Lauren had watched Tomas step into the blizzard alone, watched him kill 3 men with the same cold efficiency she might use to cross items off a grocery list, watched bodies fall into snow that would bury them by morning. And she understood with brutal clarity. The man who'd saved her children was also a man capable of extraordinary violence. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "It's me," Tomas's voice said quietly. Lauren hesitated, then crossed to open it. He stood in the hallway, still wearing the soaked shirt that clung to his frame, snow melting in his dark hair. His tattoos stood out starkly against skin that should have been blue from cold but somehow wasn't. There was no blood on him, he'd been too precise for that, but his knuckles were raw from the Glock's recoil. He didn't enter. Just stood there, studying her face with that unreadable expression. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "The boys are scared, but they're okay." Tomas nodded once. His eyes moved past her to where Noah and Caleb huddled on the bed, watching him with wide, frightened eyes. "I'm sorry they saw that," he said quietly. "They've seen worse." The words tasted bitter. "Men breaking into our apartment, our building burning. This isn't their first time watching violence." Something flickered in Tomas's expression, not quite sympathy, but understanding. He knew what it meant to have childhood stolen by brutality. "The men who came tonight," he said. "They were professionals, military training, expensive equipment. That's not random enforcement. Someone paid significant money to kill you." Lauren's arms wrapped around herself. "Javier? Or whoever's above him." Tomas's jaw tightened. "I need to make calls, find out who authorized this. But first," he paused, "you need to decide if you're staying." "What?" "After what you just saw, you have every right to leave. I can get you to a safe house, new identities, money. You'd be gone before sunrise." Lauren stared at him. "You're giving me a choice? After all this?" "You're not a prisoner." His voice was quiet but absolute. "You came here desperate. I won't keep you desperate. If you want out, I'll make sure you're protected. But it means running again. Hiding. Living in fear that someday they'll find you anyway. And if I stay?" Tomas met her eyes directly. "Then you're part of this until it's finished. That means watching me dismantle the people who killed your husband. It means your children living in a house where violence might come again. It means trusting me to keep you safe while I clean out the rot in my own organization." The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Emma stirred in her blankets, making soft sounds. Lauren looked at her sons, Noah's tear-stained face, Caleb's empty expression. Looked at Emma, who deserved to grow up knowing her father had been avenged. Looked at the warm room, the safety, the first real protection they'd had in weeks. Then she looked at Tomas, dangerous, violent, but standing in her doorway asking permission instead of giving orders. "I want them to pay," she said quietly. "All of them. For Daniel. For what they did to my family. I don't want to run anymore." Tomas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start finding answers." He turned to leave, then paused. "The men outside tonight? They'll talk before they die. Word will spread that you're under my protection. That makes this official. You understand what that means? It means you're choosing me over your own lieutenant. It means I'm choosing accountability over corruption." His voice was cold. "There's a difference." He walked away, his footsteps silent on the hardwood. Lauren closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. She just committed herself and her children to a war inside a criminal empire. But for the first time since Daniel died, she felt like she might actually survive. In his office, Tomas made the first call. The phone rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. "It's 2 in the morning. "I need information," Tomas said without preamble. "Javier Ruiz. What's he been moving besides what I authorized?" Silence. Then, "Why are you asking?" "Because 10 men just tried to kill a witness on my property, and the trail leads back to Javier's operations." More silence. The man on the other end, Ricardo, who'd run intelligence for Tomas for a decade, let out a slow breath. "I've been hearing things," Ricardo admitted. "Whispers about unauthorized shipments, routes that don't match our books. I thought maybe you'd approved it quietly." "I didn't." "Then we've got a problem, because Javier's been operating independently for at least 4 months, and he's got backing." Tomas's hand tightened on the phone. "What kind of backing?" "The kind that comes with offshore accounts and political protection. Someone's been funneling money into his operation. Big money. The kind that suggests he's not working alone. Names." "I don't have them yet. But I can tell you this. 3 of your other lieutenants have been meeting with Javier privately. No security. No records. Just quiet conversations in places they think you don't watch." Cold fury settled in Tomas's chest. "Which 3? Ricardo named them. 2 were men Tomas had trusted for years. The third was younger, ambitious, someone he'd been grooming for higher responsibility. A faction. Not just one rogue operator, but a coordinated betrayal. "How deep does it go?" Tomas asked quietly. "Deep enough that if you move against Javier, you might trigger a split. Some of the younger guys see him as the future. They think you've gone soft, focusing too much on legitimate business." "Soft," Tomas repeated, his voice like ice. "Their word, not mine. They don't understand that going legitimate is harder than staying criminal. They just see profits and think they can do better." Tomas was silent, processing. His empire, built over 20 years through calculated violence and strategic patience, was fracturing from within, and he'd been too focused on expansion to notice the rot spreading beneath. "I want everything on Javier," he said finally. "Financial records, communications, every person he's met with in the past 6 months. And I want to know who's funding him. That'll take time." "You have 12 hours. Tomas ended the call and immediately dialed another number. This one rang longer before a cautious voice answered. "It's late, Tomas. We need to meet. Tomorrow. The usual place." "What's this about?" "Javier Ruiz tried to have a civilian killed tonight. A widow with 3 children. The same widow whose husband stumbled onto an unauthorized weapons operation running through my territory." The voice on the other end went cold. "You're sure it's Javier?" "I'm sure. And I'm sure he's not working alone." A pause. "If you're planning what I think you're planning, I'm planning to clean my house, with or without approval. I'm giving you the courtesy of advance notice." "Tomas, if you start a war, the war's already started. I'm just deciding how it ends." He hung up before the response came. Miguel appeared in the doorway, changed into dry clothes, his face grave. "Ricardo called me too, gave me the names. Your opinion?" Miguel was quiet for a moment. 2 of those men saved your life, bled for this organization. If we move against them based on suspicion?" "It's not suspicion." Tomas pulled up the files from Daniel's hard drive, turning the laptop so Miguel could see. "It's evidence. Look at the routing codes. Look at the accounts." Miguel leaned closer, his expression darkening as he scrolled through the data. His finger stopped on one particular transfer. "That's my signature code," he said quietly. "What?" "That authorization code. It's the one I use for logistics approval. But I never signed off on this shipment." Miguel's face had gone pale. "Someone's forging my credentials." Tomas stood slowly. "They're not just building a separate operation. They're framing you to cover their tracks. If this goes public, if authorities find these records, you'd take the fall. Javier stays clean, I lose my most trusted lieutenant, and the operation continues without interference." Miguel's hands clenched into fists. "Who?" "That's what we're going to find out." Tomas moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered darkness. Bodies had already been removed, the blood buried under fresh powder, like it never happened. But it had happened, and more violence was coming. "Lauren refused to leave," Tomas said quietly. Miguel nodded. "She's got spine. More than most. She wants justice. Can you give it to her?" Tomas watched the snow fall, thinking of 3 children sleeping upstairs, thinking of a woman who'd chosen to stand her ground instead of run, thinking of the empire he'd built that was now threatening to tear itself apart. "Yes," he said finally, "but it's going to cost everything." The storm broke just before dawn. Tomas stood on the porch of the lodge, watching pale light filter through dissipating clouds. The blizzard had buried the world in 3 feet of fresh snow, transforming the landscape into something pristine and deceptive, beautiful if you didn't know what lay beneath. Miguel emerged from inside, carrying 2 thermal mugs of coffee. He handed one to Tomas without speaking. Both men stood in silence, watching the mountains emerge from white darkness. "Ricardo came through," Miguel said finally. "Javier's at the warehouse on Route 7, the one we use for equipment storage." "Alone?" "2 men with him, the rest scattered after last night." Miguel paused. Words spreading fast. "Everyone knows you're protecting the widow. Javier's calling it a betrayal." Tomas's jaw tightened. "He murders a civilian, runs unauthorized operations, forges your credentials, and sends a kill team to my home. But I'm the one betraying loyalty. That's how he's spinning it. Says you've gone soft, that you're choosing outsiders over family." "Family." Tomas's voice was cold. He doesn't know what that word means. Behind them, the door opened quietly. Lauren stood in the doorway, wrapped in a borrowed sweater that hung loose on her thin frame. Her hair was pulled back, revealing the shadows under her eyes, evidence of another sleepless night. "The children are still sleeping," she said quietly. "Miguel's wife is watching them." Tomas turned, surprised. "Maria's here?" Miguel nodded. "Called her after things settled. Figured the kids needed someone gentler than us around." Something in Tomas's chest tightened gratitude for a kindness he hadn't asked for but needed. Lauren stepped onto the porch, hugging herself against the cold. "You're going after him today, Javier." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Tomas said. "I want to come." "No, he killed my husband." "Which is exactly why you stay here." Tomas's voice was firm but not harsh. "This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. And justice doesn't require witnesses." Lauren's eyes flashed. "I have a right. You have children who need their mother alive." Tomas held her gaze. "What happens today won't be clean, won't be pretty. It's the part of my world you don't need to see. I've already seen you kill 3 men. That was defense. This is judgment." He paused. "There's a difference." Lauren opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. She studied his face, the cold determination, the weight of what he was about to do, settling into his expression like armor. "Will you tell me?" she asked quietly. "After. Will you tell me it's done?" "Yes." She nodded slowly, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It showed a man with kind eyes and an easy smile, his arm around Lauren, both of them laughing at something beyond the frame. "Daniel," she said, her voice thick. "He wasn't perfect, but he was good. He tried to do the right thing, and they killed him for it." She pressed the photograph into Tomas's hand. "When you see Javier, I want you to remember this face. Remember the man he took from my children." Tomas looked down at the photograph. Daniel Bennett stared back at him, an ordinary man caught in an extraordinary nightmare. A man who'd made one moral choice and paid with his life. "I'll remember," Tomas said quietly. Lauren turned and went back inside, her shoulders straight despite the trembling in her hands. Miguel exhaled slowly. "You ready for this?" "No," Tomas pocketed the photograph. "But it's time anyway." The warehouse squatted at the edge of town like a gray scar against white landscape. Single story, corrugated metal, surrounded by chain-link fence. Snow had drifted against the walls, burying the loading docks. 2 vehicles sat in the plowed lot, Javier's black SUV, and a sedan Tomas recognized as belonging to one of the younger lieutenants. Miguel drove, the heavy truck crunching through snow. 2 other vehicles followed men Tomas trusted absolutely, armed and ready. Not for a firefight, for control. They parked, blocking the exit. Tomas stepped out into the cold, wearing his black suit despite the weather. No coat, no concessions. The tattoos on his neck stood out starkly against his collar, visible statements of who he was and what he'd survived. Miguel flanked him, along with 4 other men. They moved with quiet precision toward the warehouse entrance. Inside, industrial lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across stacked equipment crates. The space smelled of motor oil and cold metal. Javier Ruiz stood near the back, flanked by 2 men. He was younger than Tomas, mid-30s, muscular, wearing expensive tactical gear like he was preparing for war, his handsome features twisted into a sneer when Tomas entered. "The king arrives," Javier said mockingly. "Come to slum with the workers?" Tomas stopped 20 feet away, his hands loose at his sides. His men spread out, cutting off exits, establishing position without aggression. "Dismiss your men," Tomas said quietly. "Why would I do that?" "Because what happens next is between us. Give them the chance to walk away clean." Javier laughed sharp, bitter. "You think I'm afraid of you? You're a relic, Tomas. The world's moved on. We could be running this region, but you're too busy playing legitimate businessman. I gave you territory, resources, trust. You gave me scraps." Javier's voice rose. "While you waste time on legal contracts and political relationships, real money's being made. I found it, built it. And you want to tear it down because some nobody stumbled onto a shipment? Daniel Bennett wasn't nobody. He was a civilian you murdered without authorization. He was a threat. He was a logistics contractor." Tomas's voice cut like ice. "You killed him, terrorized his family, and sent assassins to my home. You violated every principle this organization stands on. Your principles are why we're weak." Javier stepped forward, his men moving with him. "The old families are laughing at us. We could own this state, but you're too afraid to take it." "I'm not afraid of power," Tomas said quietly. "I'm disciplined with it. There's a difference you never learned." Javier's hand moved toward his weapon. "Don't." Miguel's gun was already out, trained steady. The other men followed suit, a synchronized display of controlled force. Javier froze, his face twisting with rage and fear. "Tell them to leave," Tomas repeated. Javier glanced at his two companions, younger men, barely in their 20s, eyes wide with sudden terror. Whatever fantasy of rebellion they'd entertained died in that moment. "Go," Javier said through clenched teeth. They ran. The warehouse fell silent, except for the hum of lights and the distant sound of engines fading. Tomas walked forward slowly, his footsteps echoing on concrete. "Daniel Bennett had a wife," he said quietly. 3 children. The youngest is an infant who'll never know her father. Because you decided one man's conscience was worth less than your profit margin. Business requires hard choices. This wasn't business. Tomas pulled out the photograph Lauren had given him, held it up so Javier could see. This was murder. Sloppy, unauthorized, reckless murder that brought federal attention and threatened everything we built. Javier's eyes darted to the photo, then away. "He would have destroyed us. He would have exposed your operation, an operation I never authorized, an operation you built using forged credentials, shell companies, and money from sources you won't name." Tomas stepped closer, his voice dropping to something colder than the snow outside. "You didn't protect the organization. You endangered it. And worse, you forgot the one rule I enforce absolutely." "What rule?" "Loyalty doesn't mean cruelty." Tomas's eyes were dark, unforgiving. "Power without discipline is just chaos, and I don't allow chaos in my empire." Javier's hand twitched toward his weapon again, desperation overriding survival instinct. He was fast. Tomas was faster. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse like thunder, sharp and final. Javier fell, clutching his chest, blood spreading across his tactical vest. He looked up at Tomas with shock and hatred, his mouth working soundlessly. Tomas stood over him, his expression carved from stone. "You asked if I'd gone soft," he said quietly. "Here's your answer." He fired once more. Silence crashed down like a weight. Miguel moved forward, checking the body with professional detachment. "It's done." Tomas lowered the weapon, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just the cold certainty that justice, his version of it, had been served. He pulled out his phone and took a photo of Javier's body. Not for pleasure, for proof, for the others who might question what happened here. Then he turned to Miguel. "Send it to every lieutenant, every captain, everyone who needs to understand that this organization has standards." "What's the message?" Tomas looked at the blood pooling on concrete, thought of Daniel Bennett's photograph in his pocket, thought of Lauren and her children sleeping safely in his lodge. "The message is simple," he said quietly. "Betray the family, face the consequences. Hurt innocents, answer to me. This empire was built on discipline and honor. Anyone who forgets that ends up here." Miguel nodded and began typing on his phone. Tomas walked toward the exit, leaving Javier's body behind. Snow had started falling again. light flurries that would eventually bury the warehouse under fresh white. Outside, the morning sun broke through clouds, painting the landscape gold. Tomas breathed the cold air deep, letting it clear the smell of gunpowder and blood. It was done. But he knew, standing there in the snow with his empire fractured and a widow's trust weighing on his shoulders, this was only the beginning. The rot went deeper than one ambitious lieutenant. And before this was over, he'd have to cut out every infected piece, no matter what it cost. The photograph reached every corner of Tomas's organization within an hour. Javier Ruiz, lying in a pool of his own blood, eyes open and empty. No explanation, no justification, just the image and a single line of text. Discipline over chaos, always. Phones buzzed across the state. In secure apartments and guarded estates, men who'd spent years building power through violence stared at their screens and understood the message perfectly. Tomas Valdez had drawn a line, and anyone who crossed it would end up like Javier. By noon, 3 of Javier's known associates had disappeared, fled south toward the border or deeper into hiding. 2 others requested immediate meetings, eager to pledge loyalty and distance themselves from the dead man's operation. The younger lieutenants who'd whispered about Tomas going soft fell silent. Fear was a language everyone understood, but Tomas knew fear alone wouldn't be enough. Fear bred resentment. Resentment festered into rebellion. He needed something more permanent than intimidation. He needed a public declaration so absolute that no one would dare question it. Lauren found him in his office late that afternoon, staring at a formal invitation embossed with gold lettering. "What is it?" she asked quietly from the doorway. Tomas looked up. She'd showered and changed into clothes. Maria had brought simple jeans and a sweater that actually fit, though she still looked fragile, like she might break under the wrong pressure. "The annual Winter Charity Gala," he said. "I host it every year. Local politicians, business owners, law enforcement. It's theater. A performance to show I'm a respectable member of the community." Lauren stepped into the office. "When is it?" "Tomorrow night." Her eyes widened. "After everything that just happened?" "Because of everything that just happened." Tomas set the invitation down. "Javier's dead. His network is collapsing. But there are still people who think you're a liability. That protecting you makes me weak." "So what are you going to do?" Tomas met her gaze directly. "I'm going to take you to the gala. You and the children." Lauren's breath caught. "You want us? In public? In front of everyone?" "I want them to see you're under my protection. Not hidden away like something shameful. Standing beside me where the entire town can witness it." "That's insane." Lauren shook her head. "Those people, politicians, police, they'll ask questions. Who I am, why I'm there. You're painting a target on yourself." "The target's already there," Tomas said quietly. "This just makes the message clear. You're not collateral damage. You're not a secret. You're someone I chose to protect, and anyone who challenges that challenges me directly." Lauren stared at him, trying to understand the calculation behind those dark eyes. "Why? Why risk your reputation, your standing, everything you've built for us?" Tomas was silent for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered forest. "Because Javier was right about one thing," he said finally. "I've spent 20 years building power, territory, wealth. I've made hard choices, hurt people when necessary, ruled through fear when I had to." He turned to face her. "But somewhere in all that, I forgot what power is supposed to be for. Forgot that strength without purpose is just violence." Javier saw profit, saw expansion, but he couldn't see past his own ambition to understand that some things matter more than money. Like what? Like making sure a widow and her children don't freeze to death in a blizzard. Like holding people accountable when they murder innocents. Like using the empire I built to protect, instead of just control. Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "You barely know us." "I know enough." Tomas's voice was quiet but absolute. "I know you walked through a storm to save your children. I know you refused to run when I offered you an out. I know you're stronger than most men I've worked with." He paused. "And I know Daniel deserved better than what happened to him." The photograph still sat on Tomas's desk, Daniel's smiling face, frozen in a moment of happiness that had been stolen. Lauren wiped her eyes. "If I go to this gala, if I stand beside you in front of everyone, there's no taking it back. You'll be tied to us. Forever. I know. Your enemies will use it against you. Let them try." Lauren looked at him. Really looked. Trying to see past the dangerous exterior to understand the man underneath. A man who'd killed 3 people defending her, who'd executed his own lieutenant for justice, who now wanted to parade her and her children in front of the town's elite as a statement of protection. It was insane. It was strategic. It was possibly the kindest thing anyone had done for her since Daniel died. "I don't have anything to wear," she said quietly. Tomas's expression softened fractionally, not quite a smile, but close. "Maria's already handling it. She has excellent taste. And the boys?" "Suits. Age-appropriate. Nothing uncomfortable." He paused. "They've been through enough. This should feel special, not scary." Lauren nodded slowly, her mind racing. Then a thought occurred to her. "What do I tell people when they ask who I am?" "The truth," Tomas said. "You're Lauren Bennett, a widow, a mother, someone under my protection. They'll want to know why. They can wonder." The next evening arrived faster than Lauren expected. Maria had brought a dress, simple but elegant, deep navy blue, that made Lauren's eyes stand out. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed wealth or power, just understated grace. The boys wore dark suits that Miguel had picked out, with ties loose enough not to feel like strangling. Noah kept tugging at his collar nervously. Caleb stood silent, taking everything in with those 2 old eyes. Emma wore a soft white dress with tiny roses embroidered on the collar. She gurgled happily in Lauren's arms, oblivious to the significance of the evening. Maria fussed over them all with maternal efficiency, fixing Noah's tie, smoothing Caleb's hair, telling Lauren she looked beautiful in a way that made tears threaten again. Then Tomas appeared in the doorway. He wore a tailored black suit, no tie, as always the collar open enough to show the edge of his tattoos. His dark hair was styled back, his presence filling the room without effort. He looked every inch the powerful man he was, dangerous and controlled, and absolutely certain of his place in the world. His eyes swept over Lauren and the children, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite vulnerability, but close. "You look perfect," he said quietly. Lauren felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I feel like I'm about to walk into a lion's den." "You are," Tomas offered his arm, "but I'll be standing right beside you." The grand hall downtown had been transformed into winter elegance. White lights, ice sculptures, tables draped in silver cloth. The town's elite mingled with champagne glasses, their laughter echoing off marble floors. When Tomas entered with Lauren on his arm and her 3 children beside them, conversation stopped. Every head turned. The mayor froze mid-sentence. The police chief's eyes widened. Business owners whispered to each other, trying to understand what they were witnessing. Tomas Valdez, known criminal, feared power broker, man who existed in shadows, had just walked into the most public event of the year with a woman and children no one recognized. He didn't pause, didn't acknowledge the stares, just walked Lauren to a table near the front, pulled out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy, and sat beside her like this was the most natural thing in the world. Miguel and his wife Maria took seats nearby with the boys. Emma stayed in Lauren's arms, looking around with wide, curious eyes. The mayor approached first, a practiced politician's smile plastered on his face, though his eyes were calculating. "Tomas, wonderful to see you. And who is this lovely lady?" "Lauren Bennett," Tomas said calmly. "She and her children are staying at my lodge." The mayor's smile flickered. "Bennett? I don't believe we've met." "We haven't," Lauren said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm new to Blackridge." "Well, welcome." The mayor's eyes cut to Tomas, full of questions he didn't dare ask directly. Tomas met his gaze with absolute calm. "Lauren's under my personal protection. I wanted to make that clear." The words hung in the air, a statement, and a warning wrapped in polite conversation. The mayor nodded slowly, his political instincts telling him not to push. "Of course." "Well, enjoy the evening." He retreated quickly. Others approached throughout the night. Business associates, old contacts, people trying to gauge what this meant. Tomas introduced Lauren each time with the same quiet certainty, never explaining, never justifying, just presenting fact. Lauren watched him navigate the room with practiced ease, shaking hands, making small talk, all while keeping her within arm's reach. The boys sat with Maria, eating dessert and whispering to each other. Emma fell asleep against Lauren's shoulder, and slowly, Lauren understood. This wasn't about the gala, wasn't about charity or social standing. This was Tomas Valdez telling the entire town, criminals and civilians alike, that she belonged under his protection, that her children were untouchable, that anyone who threatened them would answer to him personally. It was the most public, the most dangerous, the most absolute declaration of protection possible. And as she sat there, in borrowed elegance, surrounded by wealth and power and whispered speculation, Lauren realized something that terrified and comforted her in equal measure. She wasn't running anymore. She was standing, and Tomás Valdez was standing with her. The gala ended near midnight, but the consequences began immediately. By morning, Tomás's phone had erupted with calls, business partners demanding explanations, political contacts expressing concern about his public display, and 3 direct threats from rival organizations who saw his protection of Lauren as weakness to exploit. He ignored most of them. But one call he couldn't dismiss came from a man named Agustin Flores, head of the largest trafficking network in the Southwestern Territories, and someone who'd maintained an uneasy alliance with Tomás for years. "You're making enemies," Agustin said without preamble. "Powerful ones. The Bennett woman's husband disrupted supply chains across 3 states. People lost money. Now you're protecting her like she's family?" "She is family," Tomás said quietly. "She's a liability. Hand her over. Let the interested parties handle their business. You stay clean." "No." Silence stretched across the line. Then Augustine's voice turned cold. "You're choosing her over alliances that keep your empire stable. That's not strategy. That's sentiment. And sentiment gets men killed. Then they can try. Tomás." "This conversation is over." He ended the call and found Lauren standing in the doorway of his office, her face pale. "I heard," she said quietly. "You're losing allies because of me. I'm losing people who were never truly allies. But your business will survive." Tomás stood, his expression firm. "Lauren, understand something. These men only respect power. The moment I hand you over to keep them comfortable, I lose more than alliances. I lose credibility. I lose the one thing that actually matters in this world, my word." "Your word to who? You barely knew me when you let us in." "My word to myself." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "I spent 20 years building an empire on discipline and control, but what's the point of power if I can't use it to protect the people who deserve it?" Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "You're risking everything." "I'm choosing what matters." Tomás's gaze was unwavering. "Money rebuilds, alliances reform, but if I let fear dictate my choices, I become exactly what Javier was, just another criminal hoarding power for its own sake." A crash from upstairs made them both turn. Lauren rushed toward the stairs, Tomás following. In the guest room, Noah had knocked over a lamp. He stood trembling, his face streaked with tears, while Caleb sat on the bed watching with that terrible blank expression. "I want Dad," Noah sobbed. "I want to go home. I want everything to be normal again." Lauren dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms. "I know, baby. I know. Why did they hurt him? Why did they have to hurt Dad?" "Because sometimes people do terrible things, but we're safe now." "Are we?" Noah pulled back, his young face twisted with fear and anger. "Those men came here. They shot at us. Everyone at that party was staring. We're not safe. We're never going to be safe." Lauren looked helpless, her own tears falling. Tomás knelt beside them, his large frame suddenly gentle. "Noah, look at me." The boy turned, his eyes red and frightened. "Your father was a good man," Tomás said quietly. "He tried to do the right thing, and bad people hurt him for it. That wasn't fair. It wasn't just. And you have every right to be angry. Then why can't we just leave? Why do we have to stay here?" "Because running doesn't fix anything. It just moves the problem somewhere else." Tomás's voice was steady, certain. "Your mother chose to stand and fight, to make sure the people who hurt your dad answer for it. That takes courage." "I'm not brave," Noah whispered. "I'm scared all the time." "Brave people are scared too. They just don't let fear make their choices for them." Noah stared at him, processing. Caleb watched from the bed, his expression finally showing something curiosity, maybe, or the first crack in his protective numbness. "Will you really keep us safe?" Noah asked. "Yes," Tomás said without hesitation. "Promise?" "I promise." Noah nodded slowly, then buried his face in his mother's shoulder again. Lauren held him tight, her eyes meeting Tomás's over her son's head. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Tomás stood, giving them space. But as he reached the door, Lauren called out, "Tomás? What happens now?" He turned. "Now I finish what Javier started. Find everyone involved in Daniel's death. Make sure they can never hurt you again. And after that, you decide what kind of life you want. and I help you build it. Later that night, Lauren couldn't sleep. She wandered downstairs and found Tomas on the porch, watching snow fall through the security lights. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. He nodded. "Why did you really let us in? That first night, you could have turned us away, called the police, done anything except pull 3 strangers into your home." Tomas was silent for a long moment, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "My sister," he said finally. "Isabella. She was 10 years younger than me. When our parents died, I raised her, protected her, built this entire empire partly so she'd never want for anything." His jaw tightened. "She got sick, cancer. I had money for the best doctors, the best treatment, but money can't cure everything. She died when she was 23. Lauren's hand covered her mouth. "The night before she died, she told me she was proud of what I'd built. But she asked me one question. What's the point of all this power if you only use it for yourself?" Tomas's voice was rough with emotion he rarely showed. "I didn't have an answer then. But when I opened that door and saw you holding your children, barely alive, I heard her voice, and I knew this was my answer. This was the point." Lauren stepped closer, her hand finding his arm. "I'm sorry about Isabella. She would have liked you, would have loved your children." He looked down at her. "You remind me of her. That stubborn refusal to give up even when the world's against you." They stood in silence, snow falling around them, 2 broken people finding unexpected strength in each other's presence. "I won't let you down," Tomas said quietly. "You already saved us," Lauren replied. "Everything else is just keeping your promise." Morning brought unexpected quiet. No threatening calls, no armed visitors, just snow melting from the eaves and pale sunlight filtering through the lodge windows. Lauren woke to find Emma cooing softly beside her, the boys still asleep in their makeshift bed. For the first time in months, she'd slept through the night without jerking awake at every sound. The lodge felt different in daylight, less like a fortress, more like a home. She found Tomas in the kitchen, surprisingly domestic in dark jeans and a thermal shirt, making coffee. The tattoos on his forearms were fully visible now, intricate patterns she'd never had time to examine before. Names woven with symbols. Dates marked in Roman numerals. A sister's name, Isabella, wrapped in delicate roses over his left wrist. "You're up early," he said without turning. "Old habit. Emma doesn't believe in sleeping past 6. Lauren settled at the kitchen island. "Is it always this quiet?" "After storms, yes. The world takes a breath before starting again." He poured coffee into 2 mugs, sliding one across to her. "We got word this morning. 2 of Javier's financial backers turned themselves in, gave prosecutors everything in exchange for reduced sentences." Lauren's hands tightened around the warm mug. "Everything?" "Names, accounts, the entire network." Tomas's expression was carefully neutral. "Federal investigators will be sorting through it for months, but the important part, the people who ordered Daniel's death, they'll face charges. Real charges, not just my version of justice, legal consequences, prison time." He paused. "It's not the same as having Daniel back, but it's accountability." Tears spilled down Lauren's cheeks before she could stop them. Not grief this time, relief. The crushing weight of running, of fearing every shadow, finally lifting. "I thought I'd feel different," she whispered. "Thought I'd feel victorious or satisfied. But I just feel tired." "That's normal." Tomas's voice was gentle. "You've been surviving on adrenaline for weeks. Now that the immediate danger's past, your body's remembering how exhausted it is. What happens now? To us?" Tomas set his mug down carefully. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. You have choices, Lauren. Real ones." He pulled out a folder from the counter, opened it to reveal documents. Option 1. New identities. I have contacts who can create complete backgrounds, social security numbers, birth certificates, employment history. You and the children disappear. Start fresh somewhere warm. California, maybe, or Arizona. Clean break from everything that happened here. Lauren stared at the papers, her heart racing. Option 2. You stay in Blackridge. I set you up with a house in town. Nothing flashy, but safe, secure. The children go to good schools. You rebuild here, under my protection but living your own life. And option 3? Tomas met her eyes directly. You stay here, at the lodge, for as long as you need. The boys have space to be children again. Emma grows up safe. And you don't have to figure everything out alone. Lauren's breath caught. You're offering us a home? I'm offering you time, space to heal without pressure to make permanent decisions. His expression was serious, vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen. This lodge has been empty for years. Just me and my ghosts. Having life here again, children laughing. Your presence, it's reminded me what home is supposed to feel like. Tomas, I can't just... We're not your responsibility. No, he agreed. You're my choice. There's a difference. Outside, they heard Noah and Caleb's voices' excited chatter as they discovered the melting snow. Maria must have gotten them up, taken them outside to play. Lauren watched through the window as her sons threw snowballs, their laughter carrying on the cold air. Caleb's face was animated, alive in a way she hadn't seen since before Daniel died. Noah was actually smiling. I don't know how to do this, she admitted quietly. How to trust again. How to let someone help without waiting for the cost to come due. There's no cost, Tomas said. Just an offer. You can refuse. Choose option 1 or 2. I'll support whatever you decide. Lauren looked at him, this dangerous, complicated man who'd killed for her family, protected them at enormous personal cost, and was now offering sanctuary without strings attached. Why? She asked. Why do all this? And don't say it's because of your sister. This is more than that. Tomas was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching hers. Because you deserve better than running, he said finally. Because your children deserve stability. Because I have the power to provide that. And for the first time in years, using that power feels like the right thing, instead of just the strategic thing. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. And maybe because when I look at you, I see someone who survived hell and came through still fighting, still protecting, still refusing to break. That kind of strength is rare, worth protecting. Lauren's hand trembled as she set down her mug. If we stay, if I choose option 3, what does that look like? Long term? Honestly? I don't know. Tomas's admission was surprisingly raw. I've never done this before. Never had people depending on me for anything except orders and protection. But I know this. You'll have safety, resources. Time to figure out who you want to be after everything that happened. And you? What do you get out of this? Tomas smiled slightly, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his usually stoic face. Maybe a chance to be something other than the man everyone fears. Maybe a reminder that power can shelter instead of destroy. He paused. Maybe a family, even if it's one I never expected. Lauren closed her eyes, overwhelmed. Every logical part of her screamed this was insane. You didn't build a life with a criminal, no matter how honorable his intentions. You didn't let your children grow up in a world of violence and moral ambiguity. But the boys were laughing outside. Emma was safe and warm upstairs. And for the first time since Daniel's death, Lauren felt like she could breathe. Can I have time? She asked. To think about it? Take all the time you need, Tomas said. The offer stands. No expiration. Lauren nodded, then impulsively reached out and took his hand, the tattooed one with his sister's name. His fingers closed gently around hers. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for seeing us, for caring when you didn't have to. You're easy to care about, Tomas said quietly. And in that moment, standing in the warm kitchen with snow melting outside and children's laughter drifting through the windows, Lauren made her choice. She didn't need more time. She already knew. Lauren found Tomas on the porch as dusk painted the mountains in shades of amber and violet. He stood with his hands braced against the railing, watching the boys build something lopsided and joyful in the melting snow. Miguel had brought out old lumber from the shed, and now Noah and Caleb were constructing what might become a fort, or might collapse into firewood. Neither boy seemed to care which. Emma slept in the baby monitor clipped to Lauren's belt, her soft breathing a steady rhythm of peace. I've made my decision, Lauren said quietly. Tomas turned, his expression carefully neutral, but she caught the tension in his shoulders, the vulnerability of someone bracing for rejection. We're staying, she continued. Here, at the lodge, if the offer's still genuine. Something shifted in his face, relief so profound it almost looked like pain. It's genuine, he said, his voice rough. For as long as you need. I need you to understand something first. Lauren stepped closer, her eyes steady on his. I'm not doing this because I'm helpless, or because I have nowhere else to go. I'm choosing this. Choosing to let my children heal somewhere they feel safe. Choosing to trust that you mean what you say. I do. I know. She smiled slightly. That's what scares me most. How much I believe you. Tomas looked back at the boys, Noah had just knocked over part of their structure, and instead of crying or fighting, both children dissolved into laughter. The sound carried across the snow-covered yard like music. Caleb smiled today, Tomas said quietly. Really smiled, not that careful blank thing he does. Miguel noticed too. He's starting to feel safe. Lauren's throat tightened. They both are. That's because of you. Because you didn't just offer shelter, you offered dignity. You stood beside us publicly when you could have hidden us away. You deserve to be seen, not hidden like something shameful. They stood in comfortable silence, watching darkness creep across the forest. Security lights flickered on around the property, reminders that this peace was protected, maintained, earned through Tomas's reputation and power. What happens tomorrow? Lauren asked. And the day after? How does this actually work? Tomorrow, Miguel's wife Maria helps you enroll the boys in the elementary school in town. Good school, safe. They'll have normal routines again. Tomas's voice was measured, practical. I've already arranged for a pediatrician to check Emma. Make sure the cold didn't cause any lasting problems. And me? You rest, heal, figure out what you want beyond just surviving. He paused. There's a library in town. Community center. If you want work eventually, I have contacts in legitimate businesses, but there's no pressure, no timeline. Lauren absorbed this, the careful way he'd thought through details she hadn't even considered yet. What about your world? She asked. The dangerous parts. How do we exist in the same space as that? Carefully, Tomas's honesty was stark. I won't lie and say this life is simple. There will be security. Guards you'll get used to seeing. Conversations I can't share. Moments when I have to be the person the world expects instead of who I am here. And if something happens, if someone comes after you, they won't get near you or the children. That's non-negotiable. His jaw tightened. But I also won't bring violence to this house. Whatever business I have to handle happens elsewhere. You and the boys get peace here. Always. Miguel called out from the yard, waving. The boys had finished their structure, a lopsided but surprisingly sturdy fort. They stood beside it proudly, waiting for adult approval. Tomas and Lauren walked down together, their shoulders almost touching. It's magnificent, Tomas declared seriously, examining the crooked walls. Noah beamed. Can we put a flag on top? Every proper fort needs a flag. Tomas pulled out his phone. I'll have Miguel bring materials tomorrow. Caleb tugged on Tomas's sleeve, a gesture of trust that made Lauren's eyes burn. Will you help us? Build it higher? Tomas crouched to the boys' level. I'd be honored. Later, after the boys had been fed and bathed, and tucked into bed with stories, Lauren stood in the doorway of the room that had become theirs. Noah slept curled around a stuffed bear Maria had brought. Caleb sprawled across his pillow, one arm flung out. Emma breathed softly in her bassinet, finally gaining the healthy weight she'd lost during their weeks of running. Her children, safe, warm, beginning to heal. Tomas appeared beside her, his presence steady and grounding. Thank you, Lauren whispered. I know I keep saying it, but I don't have better words. You gave us our lives back. You gave me something too, Tomas said quietly. Purpose that isn't just power. A reminder that the empire I built can do more than intimidate and control. Lauren looked up at him, this man who existed in contradictions, violent and gentle, feared and honorable, powerful and somehow, in this moment, vulnerable. What did your sister say? Lauren asked softly. About the point of power? Tomas's expression softened with memory and grief. She asked what good it was if I only used it for myself. And now? Now I know. He looked at the sleeping children, then back at Lauren. It's for this, for giving people who deserve safety a chance to rebuild, for making sure innocence isn't crushed by the violence of my world. Lauren reached out, her hand finding his. His fingers closed around hers, tattooed and scarred, and surprisingly warm. We're going to be okay, she said, and realized she believed it. Yes, Tomas agreed. You are. They stood together in the doorway, watching children sleep peacefully for the first time in months. Outside, snow had finally stopped falling. The storm that had brought them together had passed, leaving behind something unexpected. Not romance, not yet, maybe not ever, but something deeper. Trust forged in crisis. Family built from choice rather than blood. Safety earned through one man's decision to use power for protection instead of domination. Tomas Valdez had spent 20 years building an empire through calculated violence, but on the coldest night of winter, A desperate widow had knocked on his door and reminded him that empires mean nothing if they can't shelter the people who need it most. The dangerous man who trusted no one had opened his home to strangers, and in doing so, he'd found something he'd lost when Isabella died. A reason to be more than feared, a chance to be needed, a family. Lauren squeezed his hand once, then released it to check on Emma. Tomas watched her move through the room with gentle efficiency, every gesture speaking of fierce maternal protection. Outside, Miguel walked the perimeter. Security cameras tracked the forest line. The world remained dangerous, complicated, full of threats. But inside this lodge, in this moment, there was peace. And Tomas Valdez, the man who'd forgotten what home felt like, stood guard over it with absolute certainty. Some storms destroy everything they touch. Others clear away the debris and leave space for something better to grow. This storm had done both. And as Tomas closed the door softly and returned to his vigil by the windows, he understood with quiet clarity what Isabella had tried to teach him years ago. Power wielded with compassion doesn't make you weak, it makes you whole. Thanks for sticking with this story until the very end. You're the reason these stories feel alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to read your thoughts and connect with you in the comments.